Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining the Progress. Well, this is actually a special edition of the Progress Texas Happy Hour podcast. My name is Lana Hansen. I am the Executive Director of Texas Blue Action Democrats, and I'll be your host today. I feel like we all almost need to take a big collective breath, because to say that it has been a challenging week for women in Texas is an understatement. And, rightly so. Our nation is angry. They're angry at Texans, and they're angry at Texas. And I think it's important to make the point that Texas is not the first state to try to enact legislation like this. Texas was successful because we lost RBG last year. And so this is very much a national conversation, and Texas just happens to be ground zero in that conversation. So I wanted to bring a conversation with women that have been entrenched in this fight in Texas for too many years to count, sounding the alarm bells and talking about, what we need to do to make a difference. And now that we're here, I want to talk about how we all feel. And then I want to talk about what the hell we can do about it, because we do still have the power to make this change. And so I want to introduce our guests to start off with. We have former state senator and Democratic congressional candidate for Congressional District 21 and the founder of Deeds Not Words, Wendy Davis.
Good morning.
We have our current House Representative for District 100, civil rights attorney and staunch criminal justice reform advocate, Jasmine Crockett.
Good morning, everyone.
We have the Executive Director of Register to Vote, which is a national voter registration and educational organization. She is also the former the former Democratic nominee for Congressional District 25, and that is Julie Oliver.
Good morning.
We have Carrie Collier-Brown, who is the founder and president of Texas Blue Action Democrats. She is also senior counsel with Locke Lord and sits on the board of the Austin Planned Parenthood community.
Hi, everybody.
I have Kate Donahoe, who is a brand strategist and the founder of the Honor Roll. She has been committed to progressive politics, progressive candidates, and progressive causes in Austin area for most of her life. And so thank you for being here, Kate.
Hi, y'all.
And Katia Erisman, who is an organizer for Common Cause Texas, an activist in all of the important issues here in Texas, and just so happens to be one of my favorite people to follow on Twitter. So I thank you all for being here today to take part in this important conversation. And Wendy, I would really like to start with you and have you tell us what SB8 means, what it looks like for Texas women moving forward, and how it's different from the bill that you successfully filibustered in 2013.
So good morning, first of all, to everyone. Thank you, Progress Texas, for hosting an opportunity for us to have this conversation. And Lana, thanks so much for all your hard work to put it together. I want to go back in time a little bit. I want to go back to 2011 and talk about something that was dramatically important with regard to women's access to health care in our state. In 2011, the state made a decision to withdraw about $78 million in state funds and over $30 million in federal funds from women's health care. The argument being, of course, as it always is, an anti-abortion one. The problem was that none of these funds were actually going to women's health facilities that offered abortion. And all of these facilities who were receiving these funds were providing incredibly important support for women and men of reproductive health needs. And many of them were in areas that otherwise had no real healthcare access, particularly for people who were uninsured. As a consequence of that withdrawal of funding, over 80 clinics in our state closed. And again, not a single one of those was providing abortion care within the walls of those facilities. Not that there's anything wrong with providing that service, but the intended target, or, you know, the Republican talking points on this issue, of course, were anti-abortion. There was a huge outfall from that because women all over our state found themselves in healthcare deserts. And as you probably know, Texas has the highest percentage and number of uninsured people, including uninsured women in the country. And we have not expanded Medicaid. And so when clinics like that close, it leaves no opportunity for women to receive care for their diabetes and for other really important healthcare needs that they otherwise have nowhere else to turn. Then on top of that, in 2013, the law that I filibustered was a trap law, a law that targeted or applied or tried to apply targeted regulation to abortion providers, different than what would be provided to other outpatient healthcare facilities, and so onerous that they knew that these regulations would, if successful, close almost every single clinic offering abortion services in Texas. We successfully filibustered that bill, and that was thanks to the thousands of people, men and women, who showed up at the Texas Capitol, whose voices and pounding feet literally got us past the midnight deadline. But then Governor Perry called us back for a second special session. The bill passed into law, and the bill in part did go into law, but thankfully the federal court, including up to the Supreme Court, blocked implementation of much of it. It did cause, however, over half of our abortion clinics in Texas to close. We had 42 at the time, and more than 20 of them were forced to close. And once again, the very same women in rural and southern parts of our state that had already been living in healthcare deserts without access to reproductive health services, they also lost access to abortion care because the clinics in their communities closed. As a consequence of that, women had to begin, and all pregnant people, I'm sorry, I need to always be sensitive about our language that we use. Pregnant people had to be supported by, and thank goodness they existed, abortion funds that helped to raise money to give them the needed resources to access abortion care, whether that was the cost of the care or the cost of traveling for the care. And the US Supreme Court, as you know, 3 years later, almost to the date of our filibuster, overturned that law. But the problem was that reopening those facilities has been really challenging for a number of reasons. And I think we've only reopened 4, maybe 5 of the more than 20 that had closed. So we still aren't back where we need to be. Then this session, in a special session, what I refer to as the session of vigilantism, and I'll explain that in a moment. In this particular session, Senate Bill 8 passed. Senate Bill 8 is the anti-abortion vigilante law, but as Representative Crockett well knows, there were 2 other important, what I refer to as vigilante laws that passed. Number 1, you can now carry a handgun in Texas without having to get any kind of license or permit. And we literally have become like the days of the Old West, opportunities for shoot 'em up by anyone who gets mad about anything without having to show any underlying criteria for training and the ability to get a permit to hold that gun. We also, and Representative Crockett was such an incredibly important part of this, passed what essentially is a vigilante anti-voter law in Texas, which allows vigilantes to go into polling places and to literally harass and work to suppress and intimidate people from voting. It's a look over your shoulder intimidation, harassment bill, literally licensing, empowering vigilantes to do that. And Senate Bill 8 did the same thing for abortion, creating an opportunity for people to be financially rewarded by reporting on their neighbors and others that they know who may be receiving abortion care in Texas beyond the detection of a fetal heartbeat, which most people say is at about 6 weeks. 85 to 90% of women do not even know they are pregnant at 6 weeks. And what's so pernicious about the structure of this law was, rather than having the government be the responsible party for enforcing it, this vigilante system of private enforcement was created in an effort to keep us in the legal system from blocking the law, because it's much more difficult unless and until someone's actually utilized the law to stop it from going into effect. That was the excuse that the US Supreme Court used last week, not to enjoin the enforcement of this law. It was basically a weak, very weak standing argument, and certainly the justices in the dissent called them out on it. But as of September the 1st, because we didn't get relief in the US Supreme Court, that law has gone into effect, and abortion clinics throughout Texas are complying with it. I want to make one thing clear, though. The compliance is not coming because any of these clinics believe that this law is constitutional, nor has the Supreme Court said that this law is constitutional. No court has yet said that. And we continue to fight that battle, and we're going to fight it with everything that we have. But for now, because clinics are very worried about the personal financial risks that their doctors and other frontline healthcare workers and volunteers may be exposed to because of this law, they've chosen for now to comply as they work to utilize every effort they can in the legal system to do something about this. But now, in a state of over 7 million women and many more men of reproductive age, we no longer have safe legal access to abortion. And the final thing I'll say, and Lana, I'm sorry I talked so long.
No, Wendy, keep going. We'd love to hear your voice. You have become the face of this movement in Texas, and your voice is so valuable here, and I appreciate you taking the time to share this.
Thank you. Well, all of us are faces of this joint effort to do something about this pernicious law here. But I want to make a couple of points. Number one, this is a minority voter, a minority percentage of our state that is making a decision for the majority of us who disagree with them. The vast majority of Texans disagreed with the gun law, which allowed the use of handguns, the carrying of handguns without any training or permit. The vast majority of Texans disagreed with the voter suppression law that passed and that Representative Crockett fought so nobly against. The vast majority of Texans disagree that we should be doing anything to limit women's access to abortion care beyond the limits already imposed by Roe versus Wade. And in each of those instances, it's about 70, in some cases more than 70% of Texans who oppose the institution of these vigilante laws. And yet, radical right-wing Republicans have passed these laws because they are answering to a very specific Texas voter. And that is a far-right voter in Republican primary elections. And we need to remember this, and I think it's very important to convey this. This is not a reflection of the values of the people who live in our state. This is a reflection of the political ambitions and goals of certain radical right members of the Republican Party who believe that there's only a certain type of voter they need to respond to, and they're doing everything they can to make sure that potential voters who disagree with them will not have access to the ballot in the way that allows that disagreement to take place.
And thank you for that. And I would like to make the point, Wendy, too, that, you know, they are so committed to that voter and so committed to the control of the majority in this state that part of this bill even makes it so that as we're having this conversation here today, there are things that we will not legally discuss for fear of retribution. And for me, that is appalling. I mean, I feel like they are doing everything they can to control even the narrative and what we have to say about that. And that is a very dangerous place for us to be headed as constituents of this state. So again, thank you, Wendy. And Representative Crockett, I would really love to hear your perspective. You know, you were a staunch fighter in this legislative session. You were there working alongside these people that were, you know, determined to pass this bill, knowing that the majority of people did not want it, and knowing that as a woman, you know, and as a fighter for your district, that this would very much affect you. What was that like for you, and how do you feel about it now?
First of all, good morning, and thank you so much for deciding to engage in this very important conversation, especially with those of us that are actually here in Texas on the ground. It's much appreciated. You know, with me being a freshman, there was a lot that I did not understand this session. This was definitely an interesting time to decide to be a lawmaker, but I absolutely believe that God's plan is always perfect. And he knew that this was the exact time for someone like me to be in the ledge. I'll be honest with you. A lot of people, especially the Republicans, talked about us being whiners and the fact that we ran away from our jobs and all this other kind of stuff when we left because of the voting bill. And I want to make sure that I connect the two. What people didn't understand is that this was like the worst abusive relationship we've ever been in, right? All session long, we were getting beat up no matter how reasonable we tried to be, no matter how good a statesman we tried to be, no matter how just many amendments that we tried to bring as related to real people, we were ignored. No matter how many people came and testified this session against bills, we were ignored. Senator Wendy brought up the fact that we ended up with permitless carry. Well, this session, they kept saying, we're pro-law enforcement. We're pro-law enforcement. We're all about backing the blue. Yet all of law enforcement said, hey, this is a terrible bill. Do not enact this bill. Right. They ignored them. When it came to women coming and testifying about this, they ignored them because men decided that they wanted to make decisions about women's bodies. And the funny part about it is, and it's kind of sad at the same time, is that they put all the women that they have in the Republican Party up front to deal with this bill. In fact, one of my freshman classmates is the one that carried it. And so I was very interested to see how Shelby was going to really answer some of the questions about this bill. She is a licensed attorney who graduated from UT Law. So I thought surely she knows that this bill is completely backwards and won't go anywhere. But instead, I got a lot of her answers to questions where I'm not advised. And I'm like, how is it that you can be the author of a bill that has the ability to transform millions of lives in this state, and you say that you are uninformed? And so that's when we started to realize, it was actually after session, that we realized that so many of these bills were kind of part of a bigger agenda that was going through this country. And so, you know, basically they were nothing but vehicles for these bills. And so when asked about Shelby, well, you know, we have things like standing. Normally, someone has to be an injured party. And so that's what gives them standing to sue. How is it a random stranger is able to sue and they have no standing? How is it that they don't have to prove up damages? This is how our legal system works. And not to mention, we have a legal system that's already backed up. It was backed up before COVID. It only became more backed up Why does it make sense to implement something like this? But I'll tell you what, after fighting anti-trans legislation, this abortion stuff, guns, voting, anti-protester legislation, no one is talking about that because we've had so many bad things to come down. But as you're protesting, be mindful, because they actually enacted a new law to increase the punishment for protesting to a felony. Misdemeanors weren't good enough. Terrible bail bills, because we saw when protesters hit the street, we had non-profit organizations that decided that they would bail people out. Well, now with the new bail bill, nonprofits won't be able to post bail for those that decide to exercise their First Amendment right. I mean, it is absolutely astounding. But one thing that I said about this bill, I said, they're so stupid. They keep saying they're not advised. This will not go anywhere. This is unconstitutional. So I was like, whatever, right? At least this is one that we don't have to worry about. That was how ignorant I was. I thought they were the dumb ones. Clearly, I was wrong, because I know that when it comes to our Supreme Court in the state of Texas, they tend to be nothing but partisan. They do whatever the governor asks them to do. If he says, hey, go jump off, this roof, he's going to go do it. I mean, like, that's what they do, right? But the Supreme Court, I definitely didn't see the Supremes bowing down to the state of Texas. And sadly enough, I gave them a little too much credit. I gave things like precedents a little too much credit. I thought the law of the land actually meant something in this country. And so I am so afraid of where we're going. I can say that there are other things that they've tried to do, such as they are trying to adjust who can sit on a bench. They specifically are targeting those in the large urban centers because they are not getting the results that they want. So we will have a constitutional amendment that has only been brought about because they want to change the rules of the game about who can actually sit on a bench. And so luckily, though, we did have a Travis County judge that has stopped this as of now. But we know by the time we get to the Texas Supreme Court, we know what the Texas Supreme Court is going to do. We may have some hope on the appellate level, but by the time it gets to the Supremes, we're definitely going to have a problem. So sitting in an environment where people want to smile in your face, yet do things that are continuously harming not only you, but your constituency, and acting as if you have no voice because you guys have gerrymandered the lines to the extent that you can have the majority, which is the next thing up on the chopping block for this terrible continuation of an awful legislative cycle in the state of Texas. It has been frustrating. And this idea that we're supposed to come back and just be friends. I'm sorry, but it's hard for me to hug my abuser. It's hard for me to say, as you have spat in my face, as you've spat in the face of so many of my constituents, now we're going to be friends. It's just business. That's not what it is. These are real lives that are being affected. And the fact that they don't care, the fact that they lack all empathy, the fact that they seemingly are morally bankrupt when it comes to so many things, because you can't say that you're pro-life before a life actually enters this world. But once that life gets here, you have nothing to say for them, and you honestly don't care for them whatsoever. If you were pro-life, then you would absolutely care about our children, the children that have actually made it out the womb because their parents decided that that was what mattered, and their parents decided that they should be here. And now they're just trying to get an education that they all should be entitled to in a safe environment, yet you want to block that. You are not pro-life. This is nothing but gamesmanship. The fact that you're having protests right now about the fact that you don't want to get a vaccine, and you're saying that that's a violation of your body, and you want us to pass bills that are about anti-vaccination, but you want to tell a woman that, or even a child, let me not even say just a woman. I want to be clear that this law fails to protect children that are raped. And the authors say, well, it's about the innocent life. So you don't care about an innocent child? If this innocent child is raped and had nothing to do, and I'm not saying that this law should, only be about rape victims. I don't want people to misunderstand me when I say that. But what I do want people to understand is that There are some people that are truly making a choice, and they've got that right to make a choice under the Constitution. But there are also children that didn't make a choice, that were taken advantage of. And the fact that we had to do an amendment on this bill to say, hey, rapists can't sue and get this $10,000. We had to do that because technically under the original version of this bill, a rapist could have collected $10,000. We had to get an amendment added so that they couldn't collect money. I mean, Senator Wendy had it right when she stated specifically that this isn't about caring about serving the people of Texas. This is all about a far-right agenda that more so has to do with these far-right primaries that they are about to create when they gerrymander these lines. Because we didn't have to deal with these types of legislative priorities last session, right? We didn't have to deal with that. But now that there's new lines coming and they know that they want to make their districts more red, everything is about serving up the reddest meat that they can find, and they don't care who gets harmed in the meanwhile.
And Jasmine, I mean, thank you so much for that. And I think that last point is so incredibly important, that this is sort of a minority, in our state that we are being held down by. And I would like to have Julie, as a candidate who was on the road for 4 years speaking to voters, can you tell me what your experience was like in having conversations about abortion with voters?
Yes, because it was so memorable. I had, over the span of 4 years, 3 conversations about it. 3. That's how often it was brought up over 4 years. Because you know what, Lana? This isn't top of mind for voters. What is top of mind for voters is education. How are young people going to pay off college debt? How is somebody going to break into the healthcare system when they don't have insurance? How is a parent going to provide for a child when they're making minimum wage? That is what is top of mind to voters in Texas. It is not about a woman or again, my words, a pregnant person going to seek healthcare services and discovering in the provision of those healthcare services, if they are lucky enough to be able to get healthcare services in the state, the fact that they have a fetus growing in them that has such severe fetal abnormalities that it is not sustainable on the outside of the body. So it's just sick. And I want to remind people, and I'm going to keep it really quick because I know we have a lot more speakers who have incredible insight and stories to share as well. I want to make it very, very clear. Greg Abbott in 2018 got elected with 9% of the Texan vote. Mm-hmm. He does not represent a majority of Texans. 9% of Texans, registered voters in Texas, showed up in the primary and voted for Greg Abbott. And Greg Abbott went on to the general election, and because he has name recognition and at the time didn't have poor approval ratings, was able to win. He won with 9% of the electorate vote. Your votes matter. And I know you hear this. I know people hear it all the time, but think about that. You know why he's catering to an extremist, far-right fringe constituency? Because he was elected by them with 9% of the registered voters in Texas. So, thank you, Lana. Again, thank you, Progress Texas, for having us. And it's
and thank you, Julie. I mean, that is an incredibly important point, right? Moving forward, is that you hear Texans screaming about low voter turnout and how we need to make sure people are engaging and showing up. And even in 2020, when we had historic turnout, it was still more than 5 million registered voters did not show up in our state. And so I think that is a conversation that needs to be continuing to be incredibly loud about, and I hope that people hear us. And, with that, I want to move on to, another group of Native Texans that are here with us that are professionals in our state, in our city, that are raising daughters that are, in college or in high school or starting out their own professional lives here, and see what this means for you. How do you feel about your state now? There's been a lot of rhetoric about why doesn't everybody leave Texas? Do you think about leaving? Is that something that you process now that bills like this have been enacted? And Katia, I would love to start with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. This is so great to be on panels with such incredible Texas women. And honestly, I don't think about leaving. I think Jasmine brought up that the next part of this fight and the special sessions that do not seem to end is redistricting, and the fact that we have the power to shape the next 10 years of Texas. I think that this is more time, as much of a time than ever, for us to continue to stay involved in the fight, and if anything, to get louder in the way that we are shaping the presence that young people of color, women, and everybody is bringing to the table whenever we're talking about what our community should look like, and who is representing those communities. As a young person, as a recent high school graduate of a public high school and a public college graduate of Texas, like I represent a lot of lives that young people in Texas have experienced, where we have lived in these public schools that already don't have comprehensive and intersectional sex ed. It's already limited in our access to reproductive freedom and reproductive health care. And I think that the red meat agenda that was talked about on the last panel is right, and it's nothing new that we've been fighting. The limiting access to our ability to not only have healthcare and universal healthcare, but reproductive healthcare, I think is something that low-income and BIPOC kids and young adults are already witnessing, and that is already limiting their right to have an abortion because they're already worried about who they're getting into an intimate relationship with, because they may not even be able to afford birth control, period. So I think that these are already conversations that have been happening. This is already the lived experience that I have had as a native Texan in witnessing the intersectional attacks and affronts on young people, reproductive rights, and our freedom generally. And so I think, if anything, like we've seen that 52% of young people across the nation were like turning out to vote in the most recent election, which is great, but like that's still an F when it comes to like school standards and report cards. Like that should be the floor that we are witnessing, not the ceiling. And now is not a time to be abandoning Texans, especially Texans that are in schools, families who can't afford to leave the state. Now is a time to be standing up and fighting for those who don't have the wealth or the privilege or the access to be leaving a state that is continuing to attack our rights. It's now more time than any for us to be continuing to fight, especially with redistricting coming up.
I 100% agree, and your perspective is so valuable, Katya. And I think that as Texas grows to be one of the most diverse states in the union, right, and massively change, we have more than 150 people a day moving to Central Texas, that Texas is going to become the face of the nation, essentially, not to mention the national power that we hold in politics. And so I hope, to your point, that people don't abandon us and they continue to invest in what we're doing. And Kate, I would love to hear your perspective as somebody who's lived here for your entire life, and sort of the same question that I asked Katya.
Yeah. Well, I'm a fifth generation Texan, and I'm not going anywhere. This is home. And I think that, I've fielded so many texts from people out of the state who kind of, as we were talking about earlier in the conversation, have been like, what are you guys doing down there? And I'm like, we're doing a fucking lot down here. Okay. Excuse my French. And I think it's important to remember, if you look nationally, this is part of a larger context of this stripping away of rights. And I think, Katya, you said it well, that sort of intersectional aspect, like this is part of something very intentional and larger that isn't unique to Texas. I mean, Lana, you pointed out, we were talking the other day about 50% of states have some kind of legislation like this moving forward. And so we're not in the minority in Texas. We're the majority opinion who supports, abortion rights. And we're not in the minority in our state, in that this is part of a much larger effort. And so I have friends from out of the state texting me like, what are you guys doing? And then I have other friends here texting me, is this real? Is this happening? What can we do? What do we do? How did this happen? And it's like, this has been happening. And, there's a lot that can be done. But I guess what I'm hoping for is that now that we have your attention, we need some action.
Yes, 100%. That's exactly right. And as soon as we hear from Michelle here, we're going to move into that conversation. Like, what is it that we need to do to get this shit done here? Because there is an opportunity to make a difference, but it is going to take everybody, including support from those at a national level. And so, Michelle, I'd like to move on to you, and I would love to hear your perspective as the mother of a daughter that just went off to college, and as somebody that's lived in Texas a long time and been deep in this fight. How do you feel, and what are the conversations that are happening in your household?
Well, I just want to echo Katya's note about the lack of comprehensive sex education in the state. It is awful. And I know that because my kids, both kids went through what Texas has to offer, and it is terrible. It's just terrible. So they're at the simultaneously, they're raising the stakes on making a mistake. You know, teenagers make mistakes, y'all. Young people make mistakes, right? They're raising the stakes so high on this, but also not giving them any information, not giving them access. And that is frightening. I mean, my contemporary mom friends are making sure their daughters and those who, you know, have to have, you know, permanent birth control now so they don't find themselves in this awful position. And this is, you know, I'm speaking from a point of privilege. We have the ability to protect our daughters, but some don't. Some don't have that access that we have, and we have to stay and fight for them. We have to stay and fight because you don't throw in the towel. We are too dang close. We are 200,000 votes. Beto lost by 200,000 votes. There's 200,000 votes in Lloyd's Doggett's district that didn't get out in 2018. We got so close in 2018. They were on their best behavior in 2019. Right. Guess what? We have to bring it in 2022. We have to bring it. And so I'm here to bring the hurt, to bring the pain. I'm here for it. And I'm going to rally everybody I can to do that.
Right. And we're so glad to have you in this fight. And you're exactly right. The reason Texas has a target on its back is because we are inching away at flipping this thing and making a difference. And once we do that on the national scale, it's game over. And so, Carrie, I want to move to you as, the founder of Texas Blue Action Democrats, which, is the byline of get shit done. How do we turn this thing around in 2022? Because what I know about Texas women is that we have grit. We're not giving up. And, what does that look like? What can we do to ensure that we flip this thing next cycle?
Yeah, it's going to take every single one of us doing more than we have before. And the best advice I can give is based on what we know works. And that is get involved in your own neighborhoods. Find out who your precinct chair is. And if there's not one, sign up to be one. Sign up to be a block captain. Sign up to block walk. Sign up to do whatever. And if you've never done it before, that's okay. Blue Action Democrats was founded to support local neighborhood organizing because we know that works. A personal connection to remind people that there's an election is the single greatest way to get people out to vote.
And Carrie, to that point, I just want to say that, knocking on doors isn't always easy, and having these conversations isn't always easy, but that's why our motto and one of our focus and missions is concentrating on the issues that are at the bottom of the ballot, looking at voting for our legislators, looking at our school boards and our city councils, because their decisions are what affect our day-to-day lives. And when that is your focus, having that conversation with your neighbor is very different. And it's much easier than you expect. And that's why we really subscribe to neighborhood organizing, one neighborhood at a time, taking this thing over and investing in the education of the voters and letting them know that there's somebody like them in their neighborhood. Because Texas has this issue where we think we're alone. But the truth is we're not. And you don't know that until we're out talking to each other and showing each other that support. And to that point, Wendy and Julie, you've both been candidates, strong candidates, and, that spent so much time working in your districts. And I would love to hear your perspective on grassroots organizing and how, if you think that's beneficial to a candidate and if you think that is going to play an important role moving into 2022. And Julie, maybe you can start. Or Wendy, go ahead. Either one.
I was going to say, Julie, you start.
It absolutely matters to us as candidates. And after running, twice, 2018 and in 2020, I saw the work that consistent year-round organizing gets. I mean, I saw the manifestation of that. I'll share with y'all very quickly. We made a lot of gains in 2018. And then we, as Democrats, kind of went backwards in Texas a little bit in 2020, but not in the Blue Action Dems precincts. And I've said this before, I will say it again. If I could clone the Blue Action Dems organizing model to all of Texas 25 and all of Texas 21 and all of Texas 10, all of our congressional districts, we would have had a very, very different outcome in the election in 2020. And, it's really, for me, telling that when you do this, when you're committed to, even if it's uncomfortable, year-round organizing, year-round connections with your neighbors, having these conversations that are incredibly respectful, you can move the needle. It is doable. And when you don't do that, the results are telling as well. And I'll share this very quick little stat with y'all. And it was something that was incredibly disappointing when I discovered it. That after the 2020 election, I looked at all the 36 congressional districts in Texas, and the poorest turnout were the safe Democratic congressional seats. The poorest turnout in Texas. They were the bottom third. And it was very, very disappointing, very disheartening. And that to me indicates, I'm not sure that this is, actually causal, but at least it's indicative that once the primary is over, the organizing stops in those safe Democrat seats, and we can't stop. It's got to keep going through the general, then it's got to go through the odd year, then it's got to go through the midterm. Lather, rinse, repeat over and over and over again. And we can win in Texas if we are committed to this model.
Thank you.
I 100% agree with Julie. And I think it goes back to that saying that we've all heard, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? I mean, in this instance, we're literally talking about eating the elephant. And the only way to do that is through the kind of grassroots organizing effort that Blue Action Dems and other organizations are working to achieve. And the reason that it's effective is because it helps people take the one bite. I'm going to be responsible for my block bite, and I'm going to get the training to know how to talk to my neighbors, to know how to make sure they're registered to vote, and to make sure that I'm a part of encouraging them to turn out. And then my neighbor on the next block over is going to do the same thing. And we're going to have a precinct captain who's going to organize all of our efforts collectively. And then on top of that, we're going to have other structures of regional support. This is how we will ultimately impact the kind of electoral outcomes that we want to see. And part of it for me too revolves around making sure that we do our part to help people make a connection between what's happening in their everyday lives and their power to influence that by voting. That's why I founded Deeds Not Words, because I came to politics through advocacy. I didn't really understand the power of electoral politics. I was not a voter. I was a young single mom working 2 jobs, and the last thing in the world I was thinking about was how some politician was going to make my life better. And so we founded Deeds under the idea that if we can help high school and college age young women advocate for things that really matter to them, not to me, their agenda, not mine, but if they can advocate for the things that matter in their lives, and they're standing in front of their school boards and their city councils and their state legislature, and they're testifying and bringing their personal narratives forward, they see those decision makers, and they see the outcome of what happens when we don't have decision makers that care about the personal experiences that they have. And then they become determined to make sure that not only are they going to advocate for the things they care about, but they're going to be an active part of making sure that we're going to elect people, hopefully including them, themselves, who are going to sit in those seats of power, who are going to bring with them the kind of lived experiences and empathy for other people's lived experiences to ultimately change the outcome of policy making in our state.
And that's very true. I mean, what we're asking for here is a representative democracy, right? We do not have that as Texans. And that is really the true battle that we have here. And so thank you for making those points. And now I want to move into, sort of the magic behind having the power to make a difference in our state and to flip some of these seats. And Chris, I'd love to have you loop Michelle in. Thank you. And Michelle, I'd love to have you speak to the success of the organizing that you have done in Southwest Austin and sort of that special sauce and the magic that happens in camaraderie of this type of organizing.
Well, I just want to put this out there. It's a little bit of a confession, and maybe I'll get absolution from Senator Davis. My very first contact with any kind of organizing was through Carrie, and she was working for Wendy, just trying to get grassroots stuff going. And I was like horrified. I could not go door to door. I could not knock on my neighbor's door. Oh my God, how do I do this? And I'm not an introvert, as you might have noticed. But it was really like something I could not get my head around. And I didn't do it. And we got what we got. And so I just want everyone watching to know that you don't have to be an expert. This is not hard. We will hold your hand. And that's why we do a lot of hand holding, because I remember how just petrified I was at the beginning. And Carrie held my hand, and I've held people's hands, and now they're holding hands. So we're just starting with who we know and doing this thing and having those conversations at the door. So that might look like, hey, I'm your neighbor, and I just want you to know there's an election coming up. And I have this nice little cheat sheet of all the Democrats. And do you have questions? And I really know Julie, and she's really about healthcare. And these are the things that are really important to me. What's important to you? And so you have these little moments about education or healthcare and the things that matter to people, not just the political things, right? Mm-hmm. And that takes them to the polls. And we saw lots of cheat sheets at the polls. People help, like using our guides. And we call certain ones out so they know they really need to vote for State Board of Education District 5, because they know now how important that is. So we just started slow, but we were up to 800 volunteers last cycle. We are consistently in our districts and our precincts 5% above average turnout for Travis County. So in 2018, at 12, Travis County was like at 62. We were at 67, approaching 68% turnout on a midterm year. What? That's crazy. This last cycle in 2020, of course, we were at a huge turnout, right? 72% in Travis. We were like 77, approaching 78% as an average across our 18, 20 precincts, which is, some of those precincts are apartments. So this can be replicated. This can be done. It's just that the Texas Democrats have been in the wilderness for 30 years and they don't have the will. So we need you to join us to get the will. Because you know what? If the voters have the will, then the politicians will get the religion. They will get the message. So I may have had too much coffee today.
We love when Michelle has too much coffee. That was fantastic. And to the point that the stats that you were talking about is, in one part of Austin, but the truth is last year, Texas Blue Action Democrats organized 256 precincts. And that is true of all of them. We had 3 to 10% higher Democratic turnout than other, precincts around the state. And so that's something that we should be very proud of. And make no mistake, there are a lot of incredible Texas organizations doing this work. And so every organization is the piece of the puzzle that we are going to need to come together to get the success that we're looking for. And what we ask, I think, on a national level is that for folks that are looking at a way to get involved, make an investment in a Texas organization. Whether it's a donation or joining a phone bank or a text bank or things that you can do from where you are, look at those Texas organizations, because your money goes a lot farther investing in the grassroots organizations in Texas than it does maybe, investing in a national organization where you don't know where that money is going to be allocated. And, with that, I want to move to, Carrie and Julie and Michelle, just kind of make this a, open discussion about the importance of getting involved now. There's so much rhetoric and so much delay in we need to wait till we have candidates, or we need to wait until after the primary, or blah. Like, why do we need to do this work now? And why does this work not need to ever stop?
Because what we've been doing isn't electing more representatives for voters. I mean, it hasn't worked. Why do we keep doing the same thing, which is waiting until we know who the candidate is, or waiting until the primary is over? That is entirely too late. And I think that is one of the main reasons why we started Blue Action Democrats, and why we started organizing so early and haven't stopped. That year-round building takes a lot of time. It's not expensive in the grand scheme of what campaigns cost and what candidates spend, but it does take a lot of time, and you have to start early in order to build up that volunteer base and people's experience with going out and block walking for the first time, or just doing these things they haven't done before. And that is the reason why this works. It is hyper local. You're creating a community of engaged, active citizens. And that's what we need. That is that engagement at the local level, so that whenever we do have Democratic candidates, whenever we finally get someone who's going to decide to run for governor and for state rep and all those other important races, that we've built this base of activism and awareness in those communities, so that the candidates themselves don't have to do so much freaking work to start from scratch every 2 years, which is the system we have now.
Right. And Julie, go ahead.
I was going to say, in building off of what Carrie said, she's absolutely right. By the time you wait for a candidate, it's too late. We have to start thinking about things that there are no more off years. And in fact, I wish we were looking at every election, including our municipal elections, as important as presidential elections. So every election is a presidential. Get out there and have that fire about it. And I know it's hard. I know that a lot of times we don't like to step out of our comfort zones. We like to talk to the people we know. It's very scary to talk to strangers. We've been told that since we were children. But I think that is part of our failure as a Democratic Party. And we saw that in 2020, and the data supports that. The data shows that we were speaking into an echo chamber. We were already talking to the people who were going to go out and vote for Democrats. What we weren't doing is talking to the people who are infrequent voters and saying, hey, do you have a plan? Can I answer questions for you? I know this is really hard. There's a lot of people on the ballot, but I've gone through it, and I'm happy to share what I know with you. I'm happy to share my stories and the stories I've heard from them. So we need to be talking to the infrequent voters, and we don't do that really good. And that's why I say no more off years, because we could be talking to infrequent voters right now. I also want to acknowledge that we've lived for now a year and a half, or just about a year and a half, in our houses. That's why we're on the Zoom call. That's why we've got bookshelves behind us. Community moderates people, and we haven't lived in community for a year and a half, and we've seen what happens when we don't. We've seen the extremism take over and seize the halls of our Congress, seize the halls of the presidency. Under Trump, not under Biden, and then see what happens at the state house. So a lot of organizing can be done right now. And I know we're not in the habit perhaps of thinking that we need to be out talking to people, but we need to be talking to people. And for those of y'all who either, because physically you can't be out walking, or perhaps you really are just, I'm panicked at talking to people, and I know my own limitations. There's so much more you can do. There is cutting turf. We can teach you how to cut turf, so you can cut the turf for other people to go knock on doors. We need turf cutters all the time. There's not enough people who could do this work. Data entry, registering people to vote. There are so many ways to get involved that don't even necessarily equate to knocking on somebody's door. So there are ways to find where you fit in your comfort zone right now, but I'm going to ask you to stretch your comfort zone and make it a little broader, so that we can start picking up gains in 2022 and 2024.
And I want to just jump into the data piece that Julie was talking about, because it really matters, right? So garbage in, garbage out, right? We had a meeting of the Southwest Austin Blue Action Dems, and one of our precinct chairs said that 8 houses in her neighborhood have turned over. You were talking about all these people moving to Austin. 8 houses equated to like 15 new voters that she registered. and she identified them as Democrats, or maybe not all of them. I don't remember the exact breakdown, but the point is that our communities are evolving all the time. We have to engage them. We have to talk to them. We have to make sure that we're capturing them, because if we don't get them registered a month before the election, guess what? They can't vote. Texas has these antiquated laws that if they're coming from 40 other states that have online voter registration, same day voter registration, we don't have that in Texas. We've been living under this kind of extremist for a while because they've been, moving that ball. So I would say that we've got to get out there and collect that data, because it's constantly evolving. Mm-hmm. And that is going to help us win. And that is why we do it.
That's right, Michelle. And to that point, it's particularly important in a state like ours, where we are changing at a rapid level. I mean, the amount of people that are moving in, is truly insanity at this point, coming for jobs and cost of living and different reasons that are drawing people to Texas. And so we are in a constant state of change. And that means we're going to have to always be identifying our neighbors and working to register these new voters and getting them involved in politics, which are very much personal. And, make no mistake that while the situation with SB8 and the other 666 crazy bills that went into effect on the 1st, we have the opportunity to change this. We're still 9 seats away from flipping our state legislature, which would have made the outcome of these bills that we saw very different, y'all. And we are small percentage points from making that happen. This is not bullshit rhetoric. It's data. It's real. And we need to track it, and we need to do the work. And so I hope that while we all came into this discussion feeling pretty beat up, that we realize there's a lot of hope. And that hope can be, worked out through action. And we hope that you'll consider joining the work that we're doing. I know there's been some information about what we're doing and an opportunity to sign up as a volunteer that's been dropped in the chat. Well, I also hope that you'll look at other Texas organizations that are doing this incredible work and get involved, regardless of where you are. It's never too late. It's always important. And I want to give a huge heartfelt thank you to all of you who joined today in this conversation. I appreciate y'all and love being in this fight with you. I want to give a special thank you to the team at Progress Texas for allowing us to do this today. It's been incredible. And I want to thank everybody for joining today on this special edition for the Progress Texas Happy Hour podcast. And I hope that y'all enjoyed the conversation, because moving forward, Blue Action Democrats will be launching their own podcast that'll continue these conversations about our fight to win in Texas and what it looks like to be getting shit done as we do it. So thanks again, everybody. We appreciate you.